Welcome to the Giant Pumpkin Growing for Beginners seminar. My name is Shannon Engel. I'm a giant pumpkin grower. I've been growing giant pumpkins since 2001. I must first warn you that this is an addictive and compulsive hobby. This is your final warning. This hobby may change your life. If done right, you will do more than just grow pumpkins. You will make lifelong friends. I have taught dozens and dozens of new growers how to be champion growers. My first giant pumpkin that I grew was in 2001. It was 374 pounds. You will always remember your first year and the mistakes you make. Today's course topics are going to include site selection, soil, seeds, transplanting, plant care, watering, fruit care, and finally, the contest. Site selection is very important. I recommend full sun, slightly elevated, good drainage, availability to a water source nearby. Each pumpkin plant roughly requires 500 square feet. I grow mine in 25 by 25. Some growers grow them in as small as 10 by 15 feet. Also, when you plan your site out, plan on how you're going to get your pumpkin out in the fall. The type of soil you'll plant on is very important. Pumpkins prefer a loam or a sandy loam soil. It is best to encourage rooting. Pumpkins also prefer soil with abundant organic matter to allow slow release of nutrients and increase your soil's ability to hold water. Feed the soil to feed the microbes, and they will feed your pumpkin. First thing I always recommend to new growers is getting a true soil test. A soil test that has full macro and micronutrients along with pH. You want to get your pH as close to 7 as possible. 6.5 to 6.8 is the sweet spot. This allows the release of the available nutrients. If you're going to fertilize, go as organic as possible. If you can't find an organic fertilizer to meet your needs, a well-balanced granular fertilizer like 10-10-10, composted aged manure, not fresh manure. Pumpkins do not like fresh manure. Pumpkins also like a well-balanced water-soluble fertilizer, preferably something like a tomato fertilizer. No Miracle-Gro. Pumpkins do not like a lot of nitrogen. We typically start our plants around April 15th. My soil has soil heating cables, and we use 2 hoop houses. If you don't have a hoop house, I would not start my plants until probably the beginning of May, and not plant them outside until somewhere around May 15th. Your hoop house can be extravagant, or it can be something as simple as a clear storage container. Seed starting. We start our seeds by soaking them in lukewarm water for 4 hours. Then we place the seeds in damp but not wet, sterile, sanitized potting soil. Do not put your seeds in garden soil. Use a sterile starting base if possible. We also keep our soil for germination at 80 to 85 degrees. If things are done right, The cotyledons should be emerge from the soil in 3 to 5 days. Transplanting, the day of planting that seedling. Your outdoor soil temperature should be somewhere around 70 degrees or greater. If the soil's too cold, the plant's just going to sit there and do nothing. Don't plant too soon. We transplant into the mini greenhouse. Make sure you have a way of opening up your greenhouse and keeping it ventilated to avoid overheating. It doesn't take very long for your hoop house to heat up to 120 degrees on a sunny day. Also, don't use a pit. When I say don't use a pit, a lot of new growers try concentrating all their fertilizers and the manures and compost in one area. Feed your entire planting area because your pumpkin will feed off of that later. Everywhere later where you see green, pumpkin roots will root 4 to 6 feet from that. Pumpkins also prefer a raised bed or a small mound. It allows the soil to heat up quicker, and it also provides better drainage. When transplanting your plant, be very careful not to disturb the root base too much. Also, you want to have your main vine run the opposite of your first true leaf. If you look at the diagram here, you'll see this baby leaf poking out. The main vine is going to run in the direction of the orange arrow. This is important because if it grows backwards, you're going to have to do a little finagling later to retrain your plant. When I transplant into the garden, I give them a gallon of warm water with a light fertilizer feeding, very light. Also, make sure you protect your plants on cold nights. We use a cheap styrofoam cooler. And now is the time when you want to start preparing and preventing bugs. A little contact insecticide poured around the base of your plant will help you avoid root maggots and cutworms. Once you have your plant transplanted, you want to avoid soil compaction. Daily foot travel compacts the soil, which is going to prevent your roots from reaching their full potential. We use stepping boards, stepping stones, or walk boards. Wet ground soon becomes hard as concrete if it becomes compact. Loose soil helps with the proper oxygen exchange and root spreading. Insects and disease. Prevention is key. A lot of what I'm telling you, you want to prevent it from occurring, not react once it's occurring. Insects that are not your friends. Cucumber beetles, squash vine borers, squash bugs. Each one of these can carry a disease or virus that will kill your plant and end your season. Again, prevention is key. The only way to prevent insects is with insecticides. We use a systemic insecticide. A systemic insecticide is a chemical that is soluble and absorbed by the plant cells. When insects eat the plant, they die. The active ingredient that we use in our systemic insecticide is imidacloprid. It's available at most big box stores. We spray at transplant and again mid-June and every 30 days up until the middle of August. We also use a contact insecticide if we see active insects such as cucumber beetles or squash bugs. If you're going to spray an insecticide, spray when the bees aren't active, either early evening or later in the day. Also, if you spray during the heat of the day, sometimes spraying your plant with a chemical will cause a chemical burn. You want to avoid this if possible. A lot of people will try to grow organic. It's possible to grow organic, but it is also a lot more work to do it that way, and you have a small chance of not succeeding. You want to train your vine. If you look at the top picture here, this pattern is called a Christmas tree pattern. A pumpkin will have a main vine, side vines are secondary vines, and tertiary vines will come off the secondary vines. You're going to want to prune those tertiary vines. We'll talk about that later. We train our vines with plastic coat hangers. As you can see in the photo here, one plastic coat hanger will make 2 staples to hold your vine. You want to make sure you don't push it down too far, that you girdle your vine. Once the vine is running and becomes more mature, everywhere you see a root or a leaf stalk going up, there's going to be root nodes going down, and that plant will physically hold itself in place by its root base once it's been trained. This is one of the most important things to do as a new grower, to train your vine so you can keep track of what your main vine is, and it also becomes easier to feed and weed later when you have a pumpkin on. Remember earlier when I talked about that the plant will need a good source of water? Each plant, each 1,000 feet, or each plant requires roughly an inch of rain per week. That's 623 gallons for 1,000 square feet per week. That's 89 gallons per day for 1,000 square feet. You don't need to feed this much water early on, but probably by about the middle of July to beginning of August, when your plant has fully consumed its growing space, watering is done daily for us, unless it rains. If you live in an area where it gets too hot, some growers use shade cloths to keep their temperatures below 85 degrees. If you do everything right and you got your plant being trained correctly, probably about the middle of June, you're going to start to see the male flowers forming. The male flowers always show up roughly 10 days before your female will bloom. That typically in a field, that would signal the bees to start coming in that direction, so that when the female is ready to go, there's good traffic of bees coming to the area. We control the pollination on our pumpkins because we want to plant the seeds the next year. If you don't control the pollination, it's called an open pollination, and you don't know what pollinated that pumpkin. The male flower looks like a tulip. It often stands above the canopy, or so that it's above the leaves, and acts as a flag for the bees to come in. The female pumpkin has a small bulb. If you look at the picture, you can see Linus. That's a newly emerged female. It typically, once you see that little female that small like that, probably about 7 days later, you're going to see the night before, the flower portion of that will pucker and turn a yellow, and that typically means the next morning that flower is going to open. We try pollinating only on the main vine. Sometimes that doesn't, your Mother Nature doesn't work with you, and you have to pollinate on the secondary vine. But you want to have as much plant behind your little pumpkin as possible when it comes time for pollination. Once we see a newly formed female occurring on the main vine, we break out our patch chair. A patch chair can be anything simply from a broken chair to a plastic chair like this. We put a heavy brick on top of that to prevent the wind from blowing it around. This patch chair does a couple things. It protects the main vine from the sun during the day. It also protects your little pumpkin. Once we've pollinated the pumpkin, the patch chair stays on there. And once it gets as big as a basketball, then we'll remove the patch chair, and then we cover the fruit with a white sheet. Okay, here's something a lot of new growers don't do properly, and it's going to create a lot of problems later on in your growing season if you don't do it. You have to create an S-curve in your main vine. What this is going to do is it's going to create slack in your vine for future growth of your pumpkin. Your pumpkin's going to start close to the ground, and it's going to go up, and it's going to pull your vine. If you don't put this slack in your vine, your pumpkin can literally pull itself right off its stem. You want to cover your pumpkin to protect it from wind, rain, deer, and the sun. We've always used white sheets. Some growers will actually physically make small canopies over top of their pumpkins. I don't like doing that because I live in Wisconsin and we have a lot of wind, and I've had some bad results with a straight line wind coming through and having that become a projectile either into my pumpkin itself or into another pumpkin. We simply use white sheets to cover our pumpkins. We leave our white sheets on these pumpkins 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, up until the time to pick them. We often will take the sheets off on measuring day, and we'll switch them out with a dry sheet. When I'm spraying later for powdery mildew, I physically spray right over top of my pumpkin sheets. And that's what I've always done, and never had any problems with that. Okay, remember earlier in this video when I said prevention is key? Powdery mildew will take your plant down faster than you know what to do with. Once your plant gets powdery mildew, it's yours to keep. And then you can try controlling it, but it's better to prevent powdery mildew. To prevent powdery mildew, beginning in the middle of July, you should use a systemic or contact insecticide to prevent powdery mildew. Spray once a week, alternating your chemicals. My favorite fungicide to use is Immunox. It contains myclobutanol. And then for a regular contact fungicide, we use Daconal. We alternate those every other week. Remember, slow and steady wins the race. If your soil is properly amended, you should have to add very little fertilizer. We use a lot of biologicals to keep our plants healthy and the microbes happy. We use humic acids, fulvic acids, soluble kelp, also do everything gradually. Too much fertilizer will end your season faster than too little. A lot of new growers do something that what I call the moron technique. On the box, it'll say add 2 tablespoons per gallon. The grower thinks that half a cup is really good per gallon. All that'll do is increase the fertilizer. It'll burn the plant roots, and it will age your leaves or burn your leaves. And adding too much will shut your plant down and slow any chance you have of growth. Now we get to the exciting part. I'm going to tell you right now, there is nothing in the world like growing a giant pumpkin during its peak growth phase. If it's growing properly, it will put on 25 to 70 pounds every night. How we estimate how much it's putting on pounds, we do this by measuring our pumpkin and estimating the weight of our pumpkin. If you look in the lower left, there's a link to a weigh off calculator. That's an app that goes on your phone. It's something you want to get. We measure our pumpkins with a flexible cloth tape. You want to look for a tape that's over 200 inches if possible. We use one that's it's called a flip tape, and it's 144 inches on one side. It flips to 288 inches. If you do this right, you'll run out of tape. Down below, if you don't have the app, there's a chart out there that you go through, and you measure what's called the OTT. You measure stem to base, side to side, and the circumference of the pumpkin. You add those all together to get what's called your OTT, and then you go down on the chart or in your app and you figure out how much your pumpkin is estimated to weigh. I record that information because that gives me a good idea what my plant health is and if it needs something or if I have a problem somewhere with it. Okay. So it finally came that day that you've been growing this pumpkin all season long, and it's time to pick the pumpkin. My best advice is to find a seasoned pumpkin grower around you and see if you can use their lifting strap and a skid steer to pick your pumpkin. If you don't have that, we use a small tarp, typically a 8x8 tarp, and we have several people lift it. But once they get over 1,000 pounds, it's very difficult to be able to pick them up with a lifting tarp, and a skid steer is almost required, or a tractor, in order to keep it safe and keep your pumpkin safe. Every weigh off that you go to is going to require that your pumpkin be placed on a pallet. Some people will put cushion on their pallet in order to protect the surface between the pumpkin and the pallet. That's acceptable to do. Also remember, however you're transporting your pumpkin, you need to strap it down to prevent your pumpkin from shifting en route to wherever your weigh off is. If you've had a successful season and you make it to the end, bring your pumpkin to a weigh off. There's nothing like attending a giant pumpkin weigh off. Even if you're in last place, you still had a successful season. We celebrate all growers' successful seasons. We all had our first year, and we remember what it's like to come to our first weigh off. Your weigh offs, when you go to your weigh offs, a weigh off is a good way to network with people, to learn new things, and also it gets you charged up to see what you can do better for next year so that you can beat that person and then eventually become better than them. The number one thing I also recommend for pumpkin growers, to take pictures and have fun. This can be a very stressful hobby sometimes, but there's nothing like taking pictures and seeing the growth of your pumpkin from week to week, and then eventually getting it to the scale and getting an official weight on your pumpkin. The internet is full of resources for giant pumpkin growers. I recommend you finding a local growing club around you. The best way to find your growing club is search your state, or get on the internet and search for what clubs near you, or go to gpc.org and look to see where a new way off is and find out what the club is that supports that way off. Contact them, contact someone from them, and see if you can find a mentor. Mentorship is the best thing. If you can't find a mentor, I'm always available to answer your questions. We're on Facebook. Like I said, I'm here and available to help. I mentor new growers all year long, answering questions. Send me a text. I joke around, I call it Pumpkin 911. As a new grower, best thing to do is send me a picture, send me a text, and ask me a question. What should you be doing now? Or follow along on the Chippewa Valley Giant Pumpkin Growers Facebook page, because we give you tips of what you should be doing all season long, or what you might be seeing and how to prevent something. I'm also available by phone call or the email you see below. I will help you in any way I can help you succeed to get your pumpkin to the scale.